What's going on, folks? It's Dr. Remy LeBeau, and I'm coming at you once again from the X-Lair to provide you my deep and insightful reaction to the latest episode of Legion. We had Legion Season 2, Episode 7 aired tonight, and as usual, I'm a little bit confounded. I don't know quite what to understand about the episode. There were some clear things that happened, and there were some not so clear things that happened, so this was certainly in step with the rest of the show, and of course overall super enjoyable experience to watch this episode. Generally we are sort of taken on this journey of mystery and intrigue, and it never really ultimately leads to much, but there's always seeds being planted and things being revealed that are unexpected and interesting. And as far as the overall story, clearly the story that's happening this season, the sort of build up to the confrontation with the Shadow King, with his body being sort of the thing that's at stake and that both sides want, is eventually going to happen. But we're clearly being taken down some really interesting roads. So as far as the whole delusional thing that's been going on since the first episode, it appeared to be like a metaphorical thing, and I still am not exactly sure that like what we saw was not a sort of an interpretation of what was actually being seen and not a literal version of what was seen. Like that giant creature that was a bigger version of the small delusions that were crawling into people's heads or whatever. That may or may not have actually been there. I mean, clearly the Vermilion saw it. They said, we have to contain it or whatever, and other people saw it, but like, were they actually seeing that monster, or were they seeing something else? And what was that thing? It doesn't appear... Well, David said that it wasn't the Shadow King that sent it. And so, if it wasn't the Shadow King that sent it, then what the fuck sent it? Because the delusion was that ultimately wound up spreading very clearly in this episode to a lot of the members of the team, appeared to imply to those that are deluded that Fukuyama. Ah, man, I can't remember the name, that precise name. Fukuyama? I think it's Fukuyama. That Fukuyama is like this person-eating creature, ultimately just a threat, right? And therefore it has to be taken out. So something wants Fukuyama taken out. I mean, if Fukuyama is the head of Department 3 or whatever this organization's called, then clearly they're a threat to a lot of potentially powerful mutants. And so this could be an attack by some other mutant, right? Some other entity, some other villainous force, or maybe not. Maybe it's a benevolent force and it is actually the department that is evil and doing things that are not kosher, not cool with the mutants. So a lot of that is unclear, but clearly the point was to take out Fukuyama, and that did not happen. And it was revealed that behind the basket is just apparently a Japanese man, because I believe Fukuyama, I think is his name. I'm sorry, folks, if I'm not getting that right. The name is a Japanese name, I believe. And so, okay, so now we've gotten that there's a guy behind the basket. Who he is, the nature of him, why he uses Vermilion to communicate. Why are there so many Vermilion? What the fuck are the Vermilion? I mean, obviously they're like androids that are part human to some extent, a collective hive mind, and there were probably about 20 or 30, maybe, this episode. Maybe there's a bunch more. It's unclear, but what all of that is and who these people actually are, it's unclear. What those delusional creatures were, unclear. What did become clear was that the Shadow King was, in a very sort of stylized way, in terms of the representation, building a device to be able to communicate with future Sid. Finally being able to communicate with future Sid. They had that little powwow in that cool kind of 80s, 90s neon black environment. Future kind of past style. A sort of a kind of steampunk, but more like a pop punk-ish thing going. It was interesting. In that environment, Farouk learns that Sid actually wants to save him because David is the actual threat to her timeline. David is the reason that the world winds up in an apocalypse. So it's not something else, as I postulated in previous episode reviews. It's not Proteus. It's not some other crazy mutant. It appears to be David. David is the one that at some point may go out of control. I mean, obviously we saw the potential timelines last week. We saw him as that old man and how either intentionally or unintentionally he could eviscerate a lot with his very powerful overall just being. And so that may be a hint of what the threat might be that can come from David, and maybe eventually, reach a boiling point in the future to have the world be essentially apocalypsized. Is there a verb for apocalypse? Let me know. For the world to move into to result in a post-apocalyptic state from something that David does. What that thing is, what actually occurs, we don't know. But clearly Farouk saw it, so Farouk knows. So the Shadow King knows, and so that's information that he could use against David. David has very clearly thrown down the gauntlet with the Shadow King. He is very much pissed about the fact that his sister's gone. I really enjoyed that scene towards the beginning. Well, first we had that really interesting kind of expression of what it means to have mass delusion, and the mass delusion that was being explored was moral panic, right? So this was like part 8 of this like poetic sort of exploration of ideas. I ultimately really delusioned and what they mean to society as a whole, but also paralleling that bigger idea is like what does it mean to what's going on in the show. So there's a lot of layers of meaning going on there, obviously, but we saw sort of this exploration of the idea of a delusion spreading, and there being moral panic because the delusion is that there is a threat to our social order, and we are just going to react to it. And maybe it's just one person at first, but that can spread, and then eventually it becomes a moral panic, right? And so they use the example of parents that were going after comic books back in I believe it was the 60s, which is what resulted in the comics code being developed, which is sort of like the industry's way to kind of regulate itself. Because there was a book written, I forget what it's called, but it basically characterized comic books as threats to children and ultimately like the social order. And so so parents started turning on comic books, and therefore, that was a whole thing. And then they also kind of explore a similar type of phenomenon with the Salem witch trials, where again there was like a threat of witchcraft, and then people were being identified whether it was valid or not. They were being punished for what they were assumed to be, which is like witches or whatever, threats to the social order, and so the question is like the question that was addressed in that vignette was, what is worse, like being fearful or the afraid, like the group that are afraid, and like. It's probably the group that are afraid, like being afraid of something is not as bad as being confronted with a group that is fearful and will act irrationally collectively. So that was an interesting thing. And obviously it was a foreshadowing of what was going to happen later, but still, like, even though it's sort of guided us to what happened later, with the core group kind of going after Fukuyama. I hope that's his name. I'm sorry if it's not. Then that's a cool sort of thread or whatever for the episode. But I have a feeling it's bigger. Like, we obviously saw that. I still don't remember the guy. I need to learn the dude's name. The memory dancer is what I call him. He in the end, like, he is still stuck in a delusion, even though he got that big delusional monster out of him and David kind of killed him or whatever. We see him in the end, like, the Vermilion took him to, like, so, like, I mentioned that it was really cool when we first saw Fukuyama, like, and he had, like, behind him that image of the of a point of view of a forest standing below the trees looking up, and that appeared to be some sort of weird portal. No, it wasn't. What we saw was the Vermilion dragging the memory dancer into it, but them just being in a forest and then leaving him by a tree and then him being connected to a tree. But the tree is also, there were zeros and ones, and eventually, and it looked like it was going through a computer, and it took him into the reality that he was in when he was having the delusion. And so instead of being infected by a delusion, now he's like being plugged into a computer that's feeding him a delusion. I don't know, but clearly the Vermilion are like android type of creatures. They somehow are organic and biotechnical. And so maybe that's what they're trying to do to the memory dancer, or maybe in some way they plugged him in biologically to something technological. It appears. What does all that mean? I don't know. But clearly there's other plots happening besides the Shadow King in this season. And of course, great, but I don't know where it's leading, but so be it, you know. I'm for it. We're still on episode 7 of 11. So there's 4 more episodes. So, I mean, all of this is going to lead somewhere, folks. It's going to lead somewhere. I know it's like a show like this is not easy to watch episodically, as we have to see it now, because like one episode at a time. This is a more of a bingey show, I think, because for people that are not patient and people that are not willing to just like kind of go on the ride and like savor each episode and like the interesting, intriguing way in which it goes about telling the story, I can see it turning them off. And I don't want people to get turned off to this show because it's really good and I want it to continue. So I hope that people will be able to either be patient with it now or not watch it now and watch it when, you know, it's out on some streaming service or Blu-ray or whatever, and just binge the whole thing so that you can at least get the full experience without having to have the frustration of like, what the fuck is going on? But I have a feeling that frustration is going to be a constant with this show, and I don't have that frustration, but I can surmise that a lot of people do, and again, that's a threat to my show, and I don't want my show threatened. But fortunately, actually, I haven't heard if it's been renewed for season 3. Maybe it's been. I haven't heard it though. We'll see. It better be. God diggity damn it. Anyway, so yeah, we had that really cool, so we had that intro, and then we had the interesting kind of interaction between David and the Shadow King, where David basically confronts the Shadow King on the heinous act of taking his sister. And the Shadow King basically threw it back to David and basically said, this is what you wanted. Like, I know your fucking thoughts. Like, you thought of doing horrible things to her, and now I have done them to her. You know, and it was one of those like shocking moments for David because he knows that it's true. Like, if there were thoughts that he had and the Shadow King was in him, like, they were fully transparent to him. And so David, it was a weird sort of process for him to go through, right? Because clearly we saw him in agonizing torment in the last episode as a result of his loss. And now he's confronted with the idea that he may have wanted this at one point in his life. And that's interesting. I love that. I like that idea, but I love the interaction between him and the Shadow King. Like, that them just in the setting, kind of like this gothic type of, I don't know, long table setting, and the Shadow King, and like being, you know, very dark and shadowy, and it's just such a great way to represent the Shadow King, but also like the you know, kind of emoting a sense of surreal, mixed themes, emotions that sort of, you know, define the relationship that David and the Shadow King have. But in the astral plane, like, that is going to be represented, not just in what they say and who they are and how they emote, but also in the environment, you know, because it is all a result of two minds sort of merging within a moment and creating this like psychic environment. So always love the way it's represented, and it just makes the Shadow King feel like that much more of a threat. I love the hubris that the Shadow King is still exhibiting. It's great. Anyway, we saw more of that later when Sid and him have their little interaction as well, future Sid, and then that's when that it's revealed that David's the actual threat, which is interesting, right? We also had that weird kind of moment where Sid, in the present, talked to David about rules to set up between him and future her, and so that there's no like weird kind of boundaries being crossed within their relationship, which is kind of an odd thing if you think about it, because it is really them, even if it is a future version of her. And so, interesting. The other thing that was of interest was the stuff with Lenny was kind of, it didn't really go too far this episode. There was a little bit of Lenny. We still don't quite know what her role is. I mean, obviously the distraction is clear, but like, she's clearly a Trojan horse. So like, what is the plan there? We don't know yet, but there's something that's going to happen with Lenny, I'm sure. We didn't see Jean Smart, which is, what's her name? The blonde lady. We didn't see her, which is interesting. She's probably going to get her own episode soon. I'm assuming that she and Oliver will get back together at some point, because this whole season has been about her, like, basically just dealing with the fact that he's lost to her again. And she's sort of been sidelined because of that. But I want more of her, because like, I did like her in the last season. Like, she had a really cool presence in the show, and we're not getting much of that. Anyway, yeah, so the episode kind of ended with David destroying that weird delusional creature. Again, sort of implying that it was real, but maybe not. I don't know. And again, there's a lot of questions there. So really the episode was, I think the biggest revelation was like that David is the threat, and that future Sid wants the Shadow King to get his body back. And so that, I think those two things are going to play out dramatically. And then the other stuff that's going on, the subplot with the memory dancer and Vermilion and Fukuyama, like, that's completely like up in the air. Like, I don't know where that's going, but I'm sure it's going to go somewhere really fucking interesting. Anyway, like, this was very much a middle episode, right? Like, not too much happened, but it just enough. And it was always, of course, interesting. And so, you know, I'm happy with it. But bring me more, folks. Bring me more Legion. I need more Legion in my life. I need those 4 episodes right now. I'll watch them right now if you give them to me. But unfortunately, we have to wait for them to air one by one. And then it'll be over. But I'm pretty sure The Gifted is working on season 2 right now. So we're going to get some more X-Men show coming up very soon. And Deadpool's coming out this weekend, actually. So I'll probably have a review up of that at some point. Maybe Sunday, maybe Monday. I don't know. Depending on what time I'm able to watch it and throw down some thoughts. But that should be exciting because we're about to get some Cable. Cable finally in the films. Are they going to do a good job with Cable? I hope so. We'll see. Will it be too silly? Will it not be silly enough? You know, there's a lot to wonder about. But This is not about Legion. This is not about Deadpool. It's about Legion. We have 4 more episodes. I look forward to them. And anyway, those are my thoughts on episode 7. Episode 8 will air next week, so I will see you then. If you want to keep up with my videos, just in case you don't want to miss the next one, you don't want to miss the one after that, click on the little button down there. It's right there, right under the screen. It says subscribe. Click on that. Also, if you like the video, click a like. If you don't like the video, click a don't like. It's all right. Not everybody's going to like everything, but it's good to express your feelings in a very simple way. That's what the internet's about, right? Anyway, thanks for checking out my video. And again, I want to remind you that if you have an option to put an X or a check or something else that may or may not fit in that box, you better put an X in that box, because ain't nobody checking me. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.